The rain came down in sheets the morning Abigail Thornwood was to marry Nathaniel Blackwell, turning the dirt roads around Street Dominic's church into rivers of mud. The old stone church stood atop Cemetery Hill like a rotting tooth, its bell tower piercing the gray October sky. Townspeople whispered it was a bad omen. Rain on a wedding day meant tears in the marriage, but the Thornwoods were too proud, and the Blackwells too wealthy to postpone. Inside the vestry, Abigail sat motionless before a cracked mirror while her personal maid, Dinah, fastened the countless pearl buttons along her spine. Dinah's fingers moved with practiced efficiency, though her dark eyes never met her mistress's reflection. She had served the Thornwood family for 23 years, all 23 years of her life born into bondage in the cellar of their plantation house. "You're trembling, Dinah," Abigail said, her voice sharp as winter ice. "Steady your hands." "Yes, Miss Abigail," Dinah whispered, though the trembling only worsened. The truth was, Dinah hadn't slept in 3 nights. The dreams had come again, the same ones that had plagued her since childhood. Dreams of a woman in a tattered wedding dress, her face hidden behind a veil of Spanish moss, standing in the church's bell tower. In the dreams, the woman would point one skeletal finger downward, always downward, and Dinah would wake gasping, tasting grave dirt in her mouth. But these past 3 nights, the dreams had changed. The woman had finally lifted her veil. The face beneath was Dinah's own. "Miss Abigail," came a knock at the door. It was Ezekiel Marsh, the church sexton, his voice muffled through the ancient oak. "Your father wishes to see you before the ceremony. He's waiting in the sanctuary." Abigail rose in a rustle of silk and lace, leaving Dinah alone in the vestry. The moment the door closed, Dinah collapsed against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She reached into the pocket of her simple gray dress and withdrew a small cloth bundle tied with black thread. Inside were 3 items: a lock of hair, dark as midnight, a tooth, yellow with age, and a piece of parchment so old it threatened to crumble at her touch. Dinah had found them 2 weeks ago while cleaning the church's crypt, hidden in a loose stone behind the Blackwell family tomb. The parchment bore words in a language she couldn't read, but she understood their meaning somehow, as if they'd been burned into her very soul. The tooth belonged to Patience Blackwell, Nathaniel's great-grandmother, who had died on her wedding day in 1801. The lock of hair belonged to her maid, Mercy, a slave woman who had been found hanged in the bell tower the morning after Patience's funeral, though whether by her own hand or another's, no one could say. Dinah's grandmother had told her the story once, before the overseer's whip had silenced her forever. Mercy had loved a man, a free Negro who worked at the blacksmith's forge. But the Blackwells had sold him south 3 days before Mercy, and he were to run away together. Patience Blackwell had signed the sale order herself. Now, 53 years later, another Blackwell was to be married in Street Dominic's church, and Dinah held Mercy's curse in her trembling hands. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud the church stones seemed to shudder. In that moment, Dinah heard it, the slow, deliberate toll of the bell tower, though Ezekiel Marsh had sworn the bell rope had rotted through years ago. The bells tolled for a wedding. Or perhaps, Dinah thought, they tolled for the dead. The sanctuary of Street Dominic's church could hold 200 souls, but on this rain-soaked morning, it felt as though twice that many shadows pressed against the walls. The Blackwell family occupied the right side of the aisle, 3 generations of Virginia's wealthiest plantation owners, their faces pale and proud beneath the flickering candlelight. Across from them sat the Thornwoods, equally numerous, equally cold. Reverend Josiah Crane stood at the altar, his Bible open to the marriage rites, though his hands shook so badly he could barely turn the pages. He was 74 years old and had presided over Street Dominic's for half a century, but never had he felt such wrongness in this holy place. The air itself seemed to curdle, thick and rotten sweet, like flowers left too long on a grave. "Reverend," hissed Cornelius Blackwell, Nathaniel's father, from the front pew, "compose yourself. My son will be here momentarily." But it wasn't the ceremony that troubled Josiah Crane. It was what he'd seen in the bell tower that morning when he'd gone to investigate the phantom ringing. Claw marks. Fresh ones, carved deep into the wooden beams, and words scratched into the bronze of the bell itself, the debts of fathers. In the vestry, Dinah helped Abigail arrange her veil, but her mind was elsewhere. The cloth bundle burned against her chest where she'd hidden it in her bodice. She could feel it pulsing, warm and alive, like a second heartbeat. "You're distracted," Abigail said, studying Dinah's reflection with ice-blue eyes. "What troubles you, girl?" "Nothing, Miss Abigail. Just the storm." Lies. Abigail turned, and for the first time, Dinah saw something almost human flicker across her mistress's face. "Fear. I've known you since we were children, Dinah. You've never been able to hide your thoughts from me. What did you see?" Dinah's mouth went dry. She and Abigail were the same age, both 23, and had grown up in the same house. Abigail in the master bedroom, Dinah in the cellar. They'd played together as children before Abigail understood what ownership meant, before the whip had taught Dinah her place. "I saw death," Dinah whispered before she could stop herself. Abigail's hand flew to her throat. "Whose death?" Before Dinah could answer, the vestry door burst open. Nathaniel Blackwell stood in the doorway, his dark suit immaculate despite the rain, his handsome face twisted with urgency. "Nathaniel," Abigail gasped. "It's bad luck to see the bride before." "Damn the luck," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice raw. "Abigail, we must postpone. My brother Silas, he's been found in the cemetery." "Found?" Abigail's face went white. "What do you mean, found?" "Dead. His neck broken at the base of the old Blackwell crypt. They say he fell, but—" Nathaniel's eyes found Dinah's, and something cold passed through them. "But the slaves who found him swear they saw a woman in a wedding dress standing over his body, a woman with no face." The cloth bundle against Dinah's chest burned hotter. She pressed her hand to it, and a vision slammed into her mind with the force of a hammer blow. Mercy in the bell tower, the rope around her neck. But she wasn't alone. Silas Blackwell's great-grandfather stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, pushing her toward the edge. And Mercy was screaming a name, not her lover's name, a child's name. "Sarah, Sarah, run." Dinah's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the dresser to steady herself, but her hand knocked over Abigail's perfume bottle. It shattered on the floor, and in the spreading pool of liquid, Dinah saw a reflection that wasn't her own. A little girl with her same dark eyes stared back at her from the glass. A little girl who'd been sold away from her mother 53 years ago. A little girl named Sarah, who had been Dinah's great-grandmother. "No," Dinah breathed. "No, it can't be." The church bells began to toll again. This time, they didn't stop. The tolling bells drove everyone from the vestry into the sanctuary, where chaos had erupted. Women screamed and men shouted over one another as the relentless clanging shook dust from the rafters. Reverend Crane stood frozen at the altar, his lips moving in silent prayer, while Cornelius Blackwell bellowed orders that no one could hear over the deafening noise. Dinah stumbled through the crowd, her vision swimming. The cloth bundle against her chest had grown so hot it seared her skin, but she couldn't remove it. Her fingers wouldn't obey. Around her, the wedding guests began to change, or rather, she began to see them as they truly were. The Blackwells' fine clothes rotted before her eyes, revealing the blood that soaked their hands. Every man, every woman, every child of that cursed family bore the stains of violence. She saw them beating slaves in the fields, selling children from their mothers' arms, burning homes, destroying lives with the casual cruelty of gods who'd forgotten they were only men. And the Thornwoods were no better. Abigail's father, Edmund, wore a necklace of teeth, not jewels, but human teeth, pulled from the mouths of those who dared to run. Abigail's mother, Margaret, had fingers that dripped with poison, for she'd murdered 3 house slaves who'd witnessed her infidelities. "Make it stop!" Abigail shrieked, covering her ears. "Someone make it stop!" Ezekiel Marsh, the sexton, burst through the church's main doors, rain streaming from his weathered face. "The bell rope!" He gasped. "There ain't no rope. The tower's empty, but the bell keeps ringing." Nathaniel pushed through the crowd toward the tower stairs. "Then I'll climb up and stop it myself." "No," Dinah heard herself shout, but her voice was drowned out by another sound, a woman's voice, ancient and terrible, rising above even the bells. "The debts of fathers shall be paid in the blood of sons. The chains you forged in life shall bind you in death. 3 generations have I waited. 3 generations have I grown strong on your sins. Now comes the reckoning." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The candles guttered and died, plunging the sanctuary into gloom broken only by gray stormlight through the stained glass windows. In that dimness, Dinah saw her Mercy, standing at the top of the aisle in her tattered wedding dress, the rope still around her broken neck. But Mercy was not alone. Behind her stood an army of the dead, dozens of them, hundreds. Every slave the Blackwells and Thornwoods had worked to death, beaten to death, sold away to die in misery. Their eyes burned with cold fire, and their mouths opened as one. Witness! Nathaniel had reached the tower stairs. He climbed them 3 at a time, desperate to escape the apparitions below. Dinah tried to follow, tried to warn him, but her legs wouldn't move. She could only watch as he disappeared into the shadows above. The bells stopped. In the sudden, ringing silence, everyone heard the crack sharp and final as a judge's gavel. Then came the sound of something heavy falling, tumbling down the stone stairs. Nathaniel's body came to rest at the bottom of the tower, his neck twisted at the same impossible angle as his brother's had been. His dead eyes stared upward at something only he could see. Abigail's scream cut through the silence like a blade. Cornelius Blackwell staggered toward his son's body, but Mercy's ghost moved faster. She glided across the sanctuary floor, her feet never touching the ground, and placed one spectral hand on the old man's chest. "You," she whispered, and her voice carried to every corner of the church. "You signed the papers that sold my love away. You smiled as you did it." Cornelius's face went purple. He clutched at his chest, his mouth working soundlessly, and collapsed beside his son. The doctor who rushed to his side checked for a pulse, then looked up at the horrified crowd and slowly shook his head. 2 Blackwell men dead in less than an hour. Dinah felt the bundle against her chest cool suddenly. The tooth and the lock of hair had served their purpose. They'd called Mercy forth. But the parchment, the curse itself, still burned with purpose unfulfilled, because the curse required 3 deaths. And the wedding had not yet been stopped. Pandemonium seized Street Dominic's church. Guests trampled over one another in their desperation to reach the doors, but the heavy oak portals wouldn't budge. Edmund Thornwood and 3 other men threw their shoulders against the wood, but it held fast, as if the church itself had become a tomb sealed from within. "The windows," someone shouted, but when they tried to break the stained glass, their fists passed through empty air. The windows had become nothing more than painted illusions, beautiful lies that offered no escape. Abigail knelt beside Nathaniel's body, her wedding dress pooling in his blood. She didn't weep, couldn't weep. Her face had gone blank as fresh paper, shock stealing even grief from her. But her hands moved constantly, smoothing his hair, straightening his collar, preparing him, as if he were simply sleeping. Dinah felt the curse parchment pulse against her skin. The 3rd death. It was coming, but who? Her eyes swept the trapped congregation, seeing them through Mercy's ancient rage. Guilty, every one of them. Guilty of participation, guilty of silence, guilty of building their wealth on broken backs and broken families. But then Mercy's ghost turned, and for the first time, those burning eyes fixed on Dinah. "Child of my child's child," Mercy said, and her voice was gentler now, almost tender. "You carry my vengeance in your heart. Do you know what you must do?" Dinah's hand moved to the bundle without her willing it. "No," she whispered. "I don't understand. I didn't ask for this." Sarah didn't ask to be sold. Mercy drifted closer, and Dinah could smell her grave dirt and jasmine, death and wedding flowers. She was 5 years old. "I had hidden her in the root cellar when they came for her, but Patience Blackwell knew. She always knew. She sent the dogs." Behind Mercy, the ghost army stirred. A man stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, his ghostly form still bearing the scars of the forge. Dinah recognized him from her visions. Mercy's love, the blacksmith who'd been sold south. "Thomas," Mercy breathed his name like a prayer. "They worked you to death in the Louisiana cane fields. 6 months. That's all we had left to wait." Thomas's ghost couldn't speak. His jaw had been broken and healed wrong, but he reached for Mercy's hand, and their fingers passed through one another, unable to touch even in death. Reverend Crane found his voice at last. "This is God's house," he shouted, brandishing his Bible like a shield. "You have no power here, spirits. I command you in the name of—" "Your God?" Mercy laughed, and it was the sound of winter wind through empty branches. "Where was your God when I screamed for mercy? Where was he when they put the rope around my neck? When they told me Sarah had been sold to a plantation in Georgia, where children worked until they died?" She moved toward the Reverend with terrible purpose. "You bless the Blackwell's ships, Josiah Crane. Ships that carried human cargo. Don't speak to me of God." The Reverend stumbled backward, his Bible falling from nerveless fingers. It hit the floor and split open, and something fell from between the pages, a piece of paper, yellow with age. Dinah moved without thinking, snatching it up before anyone else could. Her blood turned to ice as she read the spidery handwriting. "Bill of sale. One Negro girl, 5 years of age, name of Sarah. Sold by Cornelius Blackwell, senior to Augustus Thornwood. Price, $400. This 15th day of October, 1801. "No," Dinah breathed, then louder, "No." The Thornwoods had bought Sarah. Abigail's great-grandfather had purchased Mercy's daughter, which meant— Dinah's eyes found Abigail, still kneeling in her dead fiancé's blood, and the terrible truth crashed over her like a wave. They were cousins, distant, twisted by the evil branching of slavery's family tree, but cousins nonetheless. Sarah had been bred like livestock on the Thornwood plantation, and her children, and her children's children, down through the generations until Dinah was born in that same cellar where Sarah had once hidden from the dogs. "The third death," Mercy said, and now her voice filled the church like thunder. "The curse demands blood of both lines. Blackwell blood has been spilled twice. Now Thornwood blood must flow." Every eye in the sanctuary turned to Abigail, but Mercy's burning gaze fixed on Dinah, and the bundle against her chest erupted in searing heat. "The choice is yours, daughter of Sarah. You hold the curse. You must complete it." Dinah's fingers trembled as they closed around the cloth bundle. The parchment inside whispered to her in a language older than words, a language of rage and righteousness, of debts unpaid and justice too long delayed. All she had to do was speak Abigail's name. Just speak it, and the curse would take her, would stop this wedding, would end the Thornwood line as surely as the Blackwell line now lay broken on the church floor. "Dinah!" Abigail's voice cut through the supernatural haze. She had risen from Nathaniel's corpse, her wedding dress soaked crimson, her face deathly pale. "Dinah, please. We were friends once. Don't you remember?" Friends? The word tasted like poison on Dinah's tongue. "You owned me, Abigail. You can't be friends with someone you own. I was a child. I didn't understand. You understood when you were 12 and had me whipped for breaking your mirror. You understood when you were 16 and sold my mother away because she looked at you wrong. Dinah's voice cracked. You understood perfectly. Margaret Thornwood pushed forward, her face twisted with fury. How dare you speak to your betters that way? Edmund, control your property before. Silence. Mercy's voice shook the foundations. The ghost moved between Dinah and the Thornwoods, her spectral form growing larger, more terrible. This girl is no one's property. Not anymore. Not ever again. The army of ghosts pressed closer, forming a circle around the living. Dinah could see their faces, now young and old, men and women, children who'd never had the chance to grow up. All of them watching her, waiting for her decision. Edmund Thornwood drew a pistol from his coat. Enough of this madness. They're just slaves, just property, just... He never finished. Mercy gestured, and the gun flew from his hand, clattering across the floor. Then she was upon him, her ghostly hands around his throat, and Edmund's face purpled as Cornelius's had. No, Dinah screamed. Stop, this isn't justice, this is just more death. Mercy paused, her fingers still at Edmund's windpipe. What would you have me do, child? They took everything from us, everything. Our lives, our loves, our children. The law protected them. The church blessed them. God himself seemed to turn his face away. What is left but vengeance? Dinah looked at the parchment in her hands, feeling its power thrumming through her bones. She thought of her mother, sold away when Dinah was 8. Her grandmother, worked to death in the tobacco fields. Her great-grandmother Sarah, stolen at 5 years old, and bred like an animal. The rage was righteous. The vengeance was deserved. But standing there in that blood-soaked church, surrounded by the dead and the damned, Dinah understood something that Mercy, in 53 years of hatred, had forgotten. Chains forged in vengeance were still chains. Sarah, Dinah said softly, your daughter Sarah, what happened to her? Mercy's grip on Edmund loosened. She died. In childbirth. She was 14. And her child? A daughter. They named her Patience, after the woman who destroyed our lives. A cruelty. Mercy's voice broke. But Patience survived. And she had a daughter, and that daughter had a daughter, down through all the years until me, Dinah finished. Sarah's blood runs in my veins, Mercy. She survived. In a way, she won. Survived? Mercy's laugh was bitter. She died a slave, Dinah. They all died slaves. Where is the victory in that? Dinah pulled the parchment from the bundle. The ancient words glowed with malevolent light, promising power, promising justice, promising an end to the Thornwood line. All she had to do was read them. Instead, she tore the parchment in half. The church exploded with sound, a shriek of rage from 100 ghost voices, the howl of wind through a vast emptiness, the crack of breaking stone. The curse energy that had been building, concentrating, preparing for its final release, suddenly had nowhere to go. Mercy's ghost flickered, her form becoming translucent. What have you done? She whispered. I waited so long. I know. Dinah's tears fell on the torn parchment, and where they landed, the paper turned to ash. But I won't let their hatred make me into them. I won't let your pain become my prison. The church doors burst open, and cold rain swept in, and with it, the first light of dawn breaking through the storm. The army of ghosts began to fade, their forms dissolving like morning mist. Some looked relieved, others looked betrayed. But Mercy remained, staring at Dinah with eyes that held 1,000 years of sorrow. Then what happens to us? She asked. Where do we go? Dinah looked at Thomas's ghost, still standing behind his love, unable to speak, unable to touch her. I don't know, Dinah admitted, but maybe it's time to find out. The moment Dinah's words left her lips, something shifted in the fabric of the church itself. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on them all began to lift. But what replaced it was worse, a terrible emptiness, like the void left by an extracted tooth. Mercy's ghost flickered violently, her form stretching and contracting as if invisible hands pulled at her from all directions. "No," she gasped. "No, I'm not ready. Thomas." But Thomas's ghost was already fading, his scarred hands reaching desperately for Mercy, even as he dissolved into nothing. His mouth moved in silent words that only she could understand, and then he was gone, scattered like smoke on the dawn wind. "Thomas!" Mercy's scream shattered 3 of the stained glass windows. Real glass this time, not illusions, and the shards rained down on the terrified congregation like tears. "Bring him back! Dinah, bring him back!" "I can't," Dinah whispered, watching in horror as her defiance of the curse began to exact its own price. "I don't have that power." The other ghosts were vanishing too, faster now, pulled toward whatever lay beyond. But they weren't going peacefully. Some clawed at the air, their silent mouths forming pleas and curses. Others went willingly, their faces relaxing into something almost like peace. A young woman, barely more than a girl, paused beside Dinah and touched her cheek with fingers cold as January ice. "Thank you," the ghost whispered, and then she too was gone. Reverend Crane had collapsed at the altar, his weathered face streaming with tears. "Forgive me," he sobbed, though whether he spoke to God or the departed, Dinah couldn't tell. "Forgive me, I didn't know, I didn't want to see." "You knew," Margaret Thornwood spat, climbing to her feet. The supernatural terror had passed, and with it, her fear. Now only rage remained. "We all knew, and we did what was necessary to build this nation, to create civilization from wilderness. These things had no right to—" Abigail's hand cracked across her mother's face. The slap echoed through the church like a gunshot. Margaret staggered, her hand flying to her reddening cheek, staring at her daughter in shock. "Enough." Abigail's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight it had never held before. "Nathaniel is dead. His father is dead. His brother is dead. And for what, Mother? For what?" "For our way of life," Margaret shrieked. "For everything we've built." "Built on bones," Abigail said. She looked at Dinah, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but a terrible, shared understanding. "We built it all on bones, and now the bones are calling in their debts." Edmund Thornwood, still gasping from Mercy's phantom grip, straightened his coat with shaking hands. "This changes nothing," he said, though his voice quavered. "Come morning, the law still stands, the order still holds, and you, girl," he pointed at Dinah, "you are still my property." Dinah felt something crack inside her chest, but it wasn't breaking, it was opening. She pulled the lock of hair and the tooth from the cloth bundle and held them up. "These belong to Mercy," she said, "a woman who loved so deeply that her rage outlasted death itself. A woman whose daughter was your grandfather's property, Mr. Thornwood, which makes her blood my blood, which makes me—" "Nothing," Edmund interrupted. "You are nothing but—" "His kin," Abigail finished quietly. "She's our kin, Father. Distant, yes. Twisted by the evil we've done, yes. But kin nonetheless." The color drained from Edmund's face. Around the sanctuary, the remaining Thornwoods and Blackwells shifted uncomfortably. To acknowledge kinship with a slave, even distant kinship, even kinship born of rape and violence, it would undermine everything their society was built upon, which was precisely why it mattered. Mercy's ghost had nearly faded completely now, her form barely more than a shimmer in the dawn light. But her eyes, those burning, sorrowful eyes, fixed on Dinah one last time. "The curse is broken," Mercy said, her voice faint as wind through grass. "But the story isn't finished. There are pages yet unwritten, child. Yours to write. Make them count." Wait! Dinah reached for her, though she knew it was futile. What happens to you now? Where do you go? Mercy smiled the first smile Dinah had seen on that spectral face. To find Thomas, to finally rest. 2. She looked around the church one last time, at the place where she'd died, where she'd haunted, where she'd raged for half a century. To let go. And then she was gone. The church fell silent, except for the sound of rain and distant thunder. The storm was passing. 2 bodies lay on the floor, Nathaniel and Cornelius Blackwell, very real, very dead. The survivors stood among them, living and changed, though few yet understood how much. Dinah walked toward the open doors, toward the gray morning light, the torn cursed parchment ashes on her hands. "Stop her," Edmund commanded, but his voice held no power anymore. No one moved. Dinah paused at the threshold of Street Dominic's church, neither inside nor out, caught between the world she'd known and the world she might claim. The rain had softened to a mist, and in the distance, she could see the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds, touching the gravestones on Cemetery Hill with gold. Behind her, she heard footsteps, heavy, determined. She turned to find Ezekiel Marsh, the sexton, his weathered face unreadable. "You think you can just walk away?" he said quietly, not threatening, asking. "I don't know," Dinah admitted, "but I have to try." Ezekiel studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Your mother," he said. "Before they sold her south, she gave me this. Made me promise to give it to you when you were old enough to understand." Dinah's hands shook as she unfolded the paper. It was a map, crude but carefully drawn, showing roads and rivers, safe houses marked with tiny crosses. The Underground Railroad, a path to freedom. "She knew," Dinah whispered. "She knew I'd need this." "She knew what this family was," Ezekiel said, "and she knew you'd be strong enough to break free. I've been waiting 23 years to keep my promise, girl. Don't make me wait any longer." Behind them, chaos erupted anew. Margaret Thornwood had seized Reverend Crane's fallen Bible and was screaming about divine order and natural law. Edmund was shouting for someone to fetch the sheriff, to bring dogs, to restore order. But Abigail stood silent in her blood-stained wedding dress, staring at the bodies of her would-be husband and his father. "This is your fault," Margaret shrieked, rounding on her daughter. "Your weakness, your sentiment. If you'd kept better control of your slaves, none of this would have." Control. Abigail's laugh was hollow, broken. "Mother, we never had control. We had fear and chains and lies we told ourselves to sleep at night. But control? No, we never had that." She walked toward Dinah, and the crowd parted before her like water. When she reached the threshold, she stood facing the woman she'd owned since birth, the woman who was her distant cousin, the woman who'd just saved her life. "I can't undo it," Abigail said. "Any of it. The pain, the separation, the cruelty. I can't bring back your mother or Nathaniel or make any of this right." "No," Dinah agreed. "You can't." "But I can do this." Abigail reached into her bodice and pulled out a folded document, her own free papers, the ones that identified her as a free woman of property. She pressed them into Dinah's hands. "Take my name. Take my identity. The storm, the chaos, the deaths in the confusion. No one will question it. You can be Abigail Thornwood, free woman of Virginia." "And you?" Dinah asked. "I'll be dead." Abigail gestured to the church, to the carnage, to the impossible events of the morning. "Lost in the tragedy, grief-stricken, drowned in the river on my way home. They'll believe it. They'll want to believe it." Margaret's scream of rage cut through the church. "Abigail Thornwood, you step away from that slave this instant." But Abigail didn't move. She looked at Dinah with eyes that held a strange, desperate hope. "Or you can walk away and leave me here. Leave me to marry again, to breed more Thornwoods, to perpetuate this evil. I won't blame you. God knows I deserve worse." Dinah looked at the papers in her hands. Freedom, purchased with identity theft and deception. Freedom, but at the cost of becoming the woman who'd enslaved her. Could she do it? Could she wear Abigail's name like a coat and pretend to be something she wasn't? Or should she take Ezekiel's map and run, become herself but hunted, free but endangered? There's a third choice, came a voice from the shadows. A woman stepped into the light, elderly, her face marked with ritual scars, her eyes knowing. Dinah recognized her, Mama Rue, the root woman who lived in the swamp, who was whispered to have powers the church couldn't touch. "I've been watching this church since midnight," Mama Rue said. "Felt the curse building, felt it break, felt something else too." She looked at Abigail. "You truly mean to free her?" "Yes," Abigail said. "Then do it properly." Mama Rue produced a document from her shawl, a bill of manumission, already filled out, needing only a signature. "Sign this. Free her legal and true. Then both of you can walk away from here and become who you need to be." Edmund lunged forward. "You have no authority. That slave is my property, and I'll see her hanged before I let. Your property just broke a curse that killed 2 Blackwells and could have killed you," Mama Rue said mildly. "You sure you want to test what else she might be capable of?" Edmund froze. The crowd froze. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Abigail took the manumission papers and laid them against the church doorframe. She pulled a pin from her hair and pricked her finger, signing in blood because there was no ink, because blood seemed appropriate somehow, because everything in this family had always been paid for in blood. "I, Abigail Thornwood," she read aloud, "do hereby manumit and set free Dinah, releasing all claim of ownership, granting her full liberty as a free person under God and law." The signature dried. The deed was done. And Dinah took her first breath as a free woman. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, Dinah stood once more at the doors of Street Dominic's church. The building looked different now, smaller somehow, less ominous. Just a church on a hill, gray stone and weathered wood, nothing more. She was not alone. Mama Rue stood beside her, along with Ezekiel Marsh and 17 other freed slaves who'd used the confusion of that terrible October day to claim their own liberation. Some had followed Ezekiel's maps north. Others had simply walked away while the Thornwoods and Blackwells were too shattered to stop them. None had been pursued with much vigor. The 2 families were too busy blaming each other for their losses, too occupied with their own unraveling. The Blackwell fortune had collapsed within weeks. With Cornelius and Nathaniel dead, and Silas before them, the patriarch's younger brother Marcus had inherited everything and promptly sold it all, fleeing to Boston with whatever he could carry. The Blackwell plantation stood empty now, windows broken, fields gone to seed. The Thornwoods had fared little better. Edmund had suffered a stroke the week after the curse, leaving him paralyzed and mute. Margaret had retreated into laudanum and madness, wandering the plantation house at night, calling for a daughter who would never answer. The family's holdings were being sold piece by piece to pay their debts. And Abigail had vanished. Some said she'd drowned herself in the river, mad with grief. Others whispered she'd run off north, become an abolitionist, was speaking at churches about the evils of slavery. Dinah suspected the truth was simpler. Abigail had done what she'd offered to do that day, become dead, become no one, become free in her own way. Dinah hoped she'd found peace. "You sure about this?" Mama Rue asked, watching Dinah with those knowing eyes. "This church took much from you. Might be best to let it stand empty." "No," Dinah said. She held a torch in her hand, its flame dancing in the winter wind. "Empty means it could be filled again. With more Thornwoods, more Blackwells, more men who think they can own other men. I won't let that happen." She thought of Mercy, gone now to whatever rest she'd earned. She thought of Thomas, silent even in death. She thought of Sarah, stolen at 5, and dead at 14, who'd survived through the children she'd never chosen to have. She thought of her mother, somewhere in the south, whom she might never see again. She thought of all the ghosts who'd stood in this church 3 months ago, waiting for justice that never came through law or God or any earthly power. "This is for them," Dinah said, and touched the torch to the church's wooden door. The old timber caught immediately. It had been doused in lamp oil the night before. Flames raced up the doorframe, across the threshold where she'd stood between slavery and freedom, licking at the walls where the Blackwells and Thornwoods had sat in their fine clothes, built on bones. The fire spread quickly, hungrily, as if the church had been waiting 53 years to burn. The bell tower caught, and the bell tolled one last time, not a phantom ringing now, but real metal singing in the heat before it fell, crashing through the burning floors to the crypt below. Dinah watched it burn, and she did not weep. The others stood with her, silent witnesses to the end of an evil place. When the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks, someone began to sing an old spiritual, wordless and low. Others joined in, their voices rising with the smoke, carrying prayers and pain and promises into the winter sky. By noon, Street Dominic's church was nothing but blackened stone and ash. By evening, Dinah was on a train heading north, Ezekiel's map in her pocket, Mama Rue's blessing in her heart, and her mother's name on her lips. The manumission papers were sewn into the lining of her coat, close to her heart, proof of freedom that no one could take away. She didn't know what she'd find in the north. Didn't know if she'd ever locate her mother, ever build the life she dreamed of, ever truly escape the shadow of the Thornwood name. But she was free to try, free to fail, free to become whoever she chose to be. Behind her, smoke still rose from Cemetery Hill, visible for miles around a black column against the gray sky, a marker, a memorial, a warning. The wedding had been destroyed, the marriage had ended before it began, and both dynasties had crumbled to ash. But Dinah lived. Dinah was free. And that, she thought as the train carried her toward an uncertain future, was the only revenge that truly mattered. Not death, but life. Not destruction, but survival. Not becoming like them, but becoming herself. The train whistle sounded, long and mournful, like a bell tolling for the dead. Or perhaps, Dinah thought with the faintest smile, like a bell ringing in the new. The end. In memory of all those who survived, who resisted, who broke curses by choosing mercy over vengeance, and who found freedom not in destroying their enemies, but in refusing to become them.